1 minute before midnight local time Monday, volleys of gunfire rang out, mixed with loud prayers, as the Taliban in Afghanistan celebrated the departure of the last American soldier after 20 years of occupation. Now, a new cabinet is said to be in discussion and even to take over in days amid tough challenges. Will the Taliban be successful in forming a new government? Will they keep their word, such as to allow Afghans with valid travel documents to leave the country if they want to? Will Afghanistan share its links with terrorist organizations? And will the international community recognize the new government that wants to enforce Sharia law? Joining me today in this special edition of The Point on the ground in Kabul, Afghanistan, is Afghan journalist Zamari Ali Abbasin, and from Kabul as well, ABDUL QANIT, an Afghan political analyst. Here in Beijing, I'm joined from the studio by Yang Shiyu, senior fellow from the China Institute of International Studies, and from Islamabad, Pakistan, by MOSHARRAF ZAIDI, strategic affairs expert at Tabadlab, a think tank. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. But first of all, let me go to Zamari Ali Abbasin, stationed in Kabul at this moment. Hello, Zamari Ali. Tell us a little bit about the progress with the formation of a new government in Afghanistan. We've seen reports, for instance, that the new government could be announced as early as of the 3rd of September. Is that true?
Hello, Laishan. The efforts from the Taliban side are accelerating, and since last 19 days when they have already reached Kabul, and finally it's just today that the Kabul airport evacuation full of chaos and catastrophes ended. But it's a long way, and one cannot say that the Taliban will be able to form the government at the beginning of September or at the mid of September, but they are already engaged in dialogue and discussion with different Afghan political figures and parties, and all those are engaged with Afghanistan's future politically. The only problem now on the stage is the Panjshir Valley, where Junior Masood, along with the former Vice President Amrullah Saleh, is resisting with some of their forces. This is a small province, and yet we get reports that there was again clashes and the resistance were claiming, but the Taliban haven't said anything about this. Many believe that if this problem is not solved, then Afghanistan will not be fully imaged, while other Northern Alliance leaders also in exile, or they are in Pakistan or Uzbekistan or other countries. So they are working together. But former President Hamid Karzai, High Council for National Reconciliation Chief Dr. Abdullah, Hizb Islami leader Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, several more are working, meeting together with the Taliban, and they are working to form a new government. But it seems to be a long way. Whether the Taliban said they seek an inclusive government, and they've already engaged with former officials as well, and they have no enmity, no revenge, no nothing. They want to establish a new government, but it's a matter of time. So it will be much clearer from today on, tomorrow, and the days coming up.
Well, can we understand that right now, at least, it is the Taliban that are running Kabul, the capital? How is the security situation after the U.S. soldier pulled out? Is there, in general, law and order?
Well, let me start from here, where I'm sitting now. There is a foreign embassy, and I was looking to Taliban fighters. They were playing volleyball, and I see in front of me there's Wazir Akbar Khan hilltop. There are still crowds, youth and young generation. They are walking around. Kabul city looks much calmer, but there are concerns at the same time, because the people are still afraid of the Taliban, whether they are making assurance that no one is being searched, followed, or no enmity and no nothing with everybody. And the Taliban leaders just holding a press conference at RTR Kabul, Afghanistan National Radio Television, and they again emphasize that they want an inclusive government, and they want better relationship with the region and the world. But the situation, not only in Kabul, in many provinces looks much calm, much secure than the last 20 years.
Yeah, you mentioned the press conference that was just also carried live on CGTN. Among the several speakers, for instance, we had the Taliban spokesman and Minister of Information and Culture Ministry, Mr. Zabihullah Mujahid. He talked about several points. For instance, he highlighted that the fact that when the United States invaded Afghanistan 20 years ago, most press propagated against us, meaning Afghanistan or Taliban. Most press and analysts saying that the US and NATO is undefeatable, but all proven wrong. What is your comment on that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I've been talking with Taliban leaders for now almost 3 years. This is their narrative, and they've been in this path, and their fighters have been go along this way, reading the history, perspectives about the future, and also all those things that were happening one after another. Those all situations showed and gave the Taliban a self-confidence, and they go on, and finally we saw that all over the country it collapsed just less than 2 months, and everybody was just surprised about this. The Taliban spokesperson and now acting minister for culture and information, Zabihullah Mujahid, as you mentioned, also emphasized on these issues. But beside, they believe that Afghanistan cannot be a sustainable, progressive country without an engagement with the region and international stage. According to Mujahid, they are seeking legitimacy and international recognition, and they want to be a member of international community. That's why the world should pay attention for a new Afghanistan, along with new relationship and new pathways in Afghanistan for a better generation in Afghanistan and a better Afghanistan for the region and the world.
Let's talk about the humanitarian situation for a moment. We understand a plane with medicine and medical equipment organized by the World Health Organization landed in Afghanistan. Tell us a bit about that. How bad is the humanitarian situation, and what is being done by the Taliban or the local people to try to address the problem?
Yes. Lucian, you are totally right. The majority of people are now starving, a bad economic situation, and lack of medicine and medication in the country, and it's already erupted because I've been talking with several entities and companies who were working in Afghanistan and providing services of medicines to different pharmacies and the clinics and hospitals. They say they are now standing in zero. They cannot give things, the medicine, and borrow and other pathways and other sort of deals with them. That's why they don't sell the products and medicine, and those who want to buy, they don't have money. Banks are still have a very bad condition, though the Taliban try to make assurance about this, but there are lack of money now, and the cash that's running out of the country, and many people are just collecting their money. They are spending less with those who have, those who don't have. Most of the people in Afghanistan had life of like daily wages, and now it's difficult for them if they cannot get the money. Yes, of course, the government employee was getting his salary, and then who was working on daily wages, he was selling something to him, and that's what's going on. The lack of everything, and according to WHO, as you mentioned, yes, we also received information, and the Taliban emphasized that the WHO and all the international organizations should be assured about their security, and we guarantee it. They should start their operation in Afghanistan, and they call on the international society to make the way easier and comfortable for Afghanistan to go further ahead.
So tell us a little bit more about how life is at this moment in the city, because you're talking about a matter of days, even weeks before a new government can be formed. And right now, the banks are running low of cash. International assistance, monetary assistance has been cut off, assets frozen of the Afghan government. What about food supplies? How are people coping with this?
Afghanistan have some resources. For example, Afghanistan is very rich in regard to fresh fruit and dry fruit, but Afghanistan lack flour, and that's the biggest thing. Pakistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, and other neighboring countries were the main exporter to Afghanistan of these raw materials, particularly the cooking oil and flour and other very major necessities of people of Afghanistan to keep living. And that's why already prices are soaring, concerns are emerging, and people and some suburb areas already complaining that there is a lack of the raw material, or the prices are too high, but the Taliban say they will open all the doors. And now what open is Iran route and Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, mainly Pakistan, because of the rush of the refugees and those who want to flee. There are still problems in this regard. But yes, it's an alarming situation for the economy, health, and also social life of Afghanistan.
Finally, since you mentioned refugees, what is the situation of displaced Afghanistans, especially in neighboring countries? Has there been an exodus? Because we are seeing videos, for instance, of people in swamps trying to cross on foot mountains to get to neighboring Iran. Is that video a reflection of the reality?
Yes, Lucian, this is the reality. Afghan people have been in bad situation because previous government didn't deliver much services, first of all. And then when the Taliban came, after 20 years of democracy, services, budget, the customs and everything, finally people of Afghanistan were starving. According to the latest report of the UNAMA, more than 18.5 million people of Afghanistan, which is half of the population of all over the country, is starving, had bad humanitarian crisis, and there are fears it will increase. Now, when we are talking in a situation after 2 months of this report, of course, the situation is getting worse, and the people are trying to flee the country, and the refugee stuff, I mean, the struggles are getting much escalating. Iran routes, they're just going there by illegal ways. Pakistan, 2 routes by Torkham and also Spin Boldak Chaman. These are the areas that thousands of people every day want to flee the country, particularly in Chaman Boldak area with Pakistan. We receive reports that tens of thousands of people have already fled. Regardless to the comments of Pakistan Interior Minister, he said that they didn't receive any refugees, but this is not correct according to our reports, and the accurate one. The people of Afghanistan are getting refuge to Pakistan mainly.
But what makes other people stay, including you?
Well, this is my home. If you ask me, this is my country. I've been here. I've worked hard, and this is my country. It's my land. I got all the opportunities here. The way I'm talking to you now, it's because of all my struggles. We had much more opportunities, particularly freedom of speech. I've been struggling all those 20 years. My family and everybody else living in Afghanistan since this last 2 decades, they've been struggling for life, and there were opportunities. There are still opportunities. Afghanistan is a rich country, and me and many more of my generation believe that we can strive, we can struggle, we can go ahead, and we can make a difference. As long as we've been in touch and contacts with the Taliban, particularly me, since the last 3 years, I've met their political office leaders, regardless to Mullah Abdul Ghani brother. I haven't met him, but Sher Mohammad Abbas Sanegzi, Sohail Shaheen, and all of them who were out there at Doha at their political office, I've been engaged, and they were assuring us. Once I asked Sher Mohammad Abbas Sanegzi, who is famous for his aggressive reaction regarding to everything in Afghanistan, he told me, you are a journalist, you are an asset, and you have to stay in the country. No one have nothing to do with you, so you have to carry on. But there are fractions, like levels of the Taliban. Some are moderate, some are the leaders, they know everything. But on the lower ranking, the soldier and fighters, it may take time to get familiar with the
Yeah.
new generation. It's a clash of the same generation with two different images.
I see. Well, I wish you all the very best luck, and thank you very much for your insights brought to us from on the ground in Kabul, Afghanistan. Many thanks, Zamari Ali Abbasin. And let's come back to our discussion. It's been indeed a lot of information. We'll try to digest that and analyze that in just a moment. But let me welcome my other guests, Mr. QANIT in Kabul, Mr. Yang Shiyu here in Beijing, and Mr. ZAIDI in Islamabad. I just want to briefly recap some of the key points that was made by the Taliban spokesperson and acting Minister of Information and Culture, Mr. Zabihullah Mujahid. Moments ago, he said during the presser, besides what I made just now, he also talked about the U.S. invasion. The purpose of the U.S. invasion is to maintain a strong base and presence in Afghanistan and the region, and wanted the country's wealth and mines. And the United States divided Afghanistan over the past 20 years. He called for work at this moment to unite the country. He talked about the economy being the priority. He said measures to be taken will be taken to further development in Afghanistan, such as in economic issues. He also called on traders, scholars, business people to work with the Taliban to contribute their capacity and capability to develop Afghanistan. He said Taliban will prepare opportunities, security, safety, and support to Afghans and give them assurances. An ex-government received countless money and support, but they stole wealth of the nation. They looted national budget and took it to Western countries. What was some of the key points of an acting Taliban spokesperson? Let me go to my guest, QANIT. QANIT, thank you very much for joining us. What is your feeling upon receiving so much information on the very first day that's been claimed the Liberation Day of Afghanistan?
Thank you for having me. It's a fact that United States, when it came to Afghanistan, had a lot of negative impacts on our people in our country. No one can deny this. When we see at the region, the United States came to Afghanistan, and after years, the whole region thought that Afghanistan is hosting a country, United States, which was seen as a political foe to the region. And that was the purpose, that we could not come up with a plan with an effective foreign policy along these 20 years to establish our relations with our neighbors. So we were not a good neighbors having United States in Afghanistan, because everyone around the region was suspecting us of hosting United States, which was not seen a good friend of theirs. So that was the foreign policy that we couldn't pursue. We couldn't come up with a good economic project. We could not come up with economic integration of this rich region, connecting Afghanistan to China, to South Asia, Pakistan, and then to Central Asia and Iran, and connecting these all countries together. There were big projects going on in the region, but we were not part of those projects because of that problem.
All right. Mr. Yang, let me go to you and get your take on what Mr. QANIT just said about the kind of implication of U.S. presence in Afghanistan in terms of affecting Afghanistan's development and its relationship with neighboring countries. What is your point here?
Well, I think the purpose of American war in Afghanistan can be declared by some official word as anti-terror. However, if you look at the whole process of the 20 years, most of the resources, most engagement were not in the anti-terror, but something else. In short, rebuilding or resetting a regime in this Islamic state. And the U.S. tried hard to reset political regime according to their value, according to their standards. And after that, after the establishment of the government, they keep inputting resources, militarily, economically, and politically, to strengthen the regime for 20 years. And what is the trigger for the withdrawal? Very simple, say, hopeless to maintain this regime. and then they make a quick withdrawal, make a decisive, make a very firm decision, and then implement the decision by this administration. So in my view, the American presence in Afghanistan in 20 years made more troubles than they have contributed to this country. And by the same token, the withdrawal of American troops will open more troubles than they made during the withdrawal process.
Very interesting point. We'll come to that in just a moment. Let me go to my guest, ZAIDI in Islamabad. What is interesting is the emphasis that Mr. Mujahid put on the economy. He said the economy is priority. He said measures will be taken to further development in Afghanistan, such as in economic issues. He said the Taliban call on traders, scholars, businessmen to work with the Taliban or with Afghanistan to contribute their capacity to develop Afghanistan. Mr. ZAIDI, how do you look at the emphasis that the Taliban is putting on economic issues and their call for input from people not just in Afghanistan but also around Afghanistan for investment and for support to develop the economy?
I think that, first of all, you know, the fact that he's focusing, that the Taliban minister, Mr. Mujahid, is focusing on the economy signifies how close to the ground he and his colleagues really are, because in my mind, the principal issue facing Afghanistan right now is a massive economic crisis, which of course for the rest of the world is not as important. For the Americans and the Western powers, it was evacuations. For many other countries, including Pakistan and China, it's counterterrorism. But principally for the Afghan people, it's the fate of the Afghan people. Only 120,000 were evacuated by the Americans, maybe another 120,000 by everyone else. But Afghanistan is a country of almost 40 million people. And right now, because the US Treasury has frozen Afghanistan's assets, that's $9 billion in the New York Federal Reserve that's frozen, and because there's so much fear and uncertainty, we're seeing a massive spike in the prices of essential items. There was a story in the Financial Times today about lentils being available at 3 times the price that they were available at 2 weeks ago. If this kind of inflation continues, and even if it lasts for another month, we're looking at a very significant crisis, because the next big challenge for the Taliban in terms of governing Afghanistan is going to be the winter. And in the winter months, Afghans will need, they will need fuel, because that fuel sustains heating, and that heating sustains life. So given that Afghanistan tends to have very cold winters, so we're looking at a number of economic issues which will melt into a number of humanitarian issues. And I think that today's UN resolution, for example, was an example of the wrong priorities that the world continues to mistake when it talks about Afghanistan.
Okay, China and Russia.
I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk
Yeah,
a
we'll
little
talk
bit more
about that. Definitely China and Russia abstained, although they didn't vote against, they abstained. We'll talk about that. Mr. QANIT, how dire do you see the situation? The fact that although Afghanistan won liberation finally, but they are facing a very severe humanitarian crisis, a very difficult winter, while they're trying to piece together a government.
Yeah, I agree that Afghanistan is going through a very troubled situation. If you look at the life on the streets, we see that Americans are leaving Afghanistan in a time when they're leaving 19 million people out of 39 million people who are not having access to proper food. And we are having 70% of Afghans living in Afghanistan under poverty line. So it means that those people who were living in Afghanistan for these 20 years, they were staying and sustaining their life on the money they were getting each day. Like they were earning from their shops, or they were like doing their jobs. And the people were middle class, lower middle class people, and they're earning money to spend it overnight. And that was enough for them. Now, when these troubles came in their way, they have problems dealing with it. They don't have money, banks are closed, and all these situations. So I am saying that if United Nations, in United States, in other countries, they pursue a policy of sanctions on Taliban, and they pursue to push Taliban from the international community and do not engage with them, this will trigger more problems, and that will affect and hurt the normal Afghan life.
Mr. Yang, wouldn't the United States be, for instance, or its NATO allies, be in a very good position to help with a humanitarian crisis instead of pulling out like that and saying, okay, you know, we wash our hands and bye-bye Afghanistan, whatever problem you have to handle it. By the way, we have sanctions and we keep the gold that belong to you.
Well, now I think Western countries led by the United States now is at dilemma. Politically, they will certainly continue the sanctions against the Taliban regime. But on the other hand, they cannot ignore the quickly emerging, very serious humanitarian crisis based on the triggered by the economic crisis and by the long time war period. So how to deal with the contradiction, political contradiction between the sanction policy and the economic contribution to the Afghanistan is a really tough policy to the US and the European countries. I'm afraid that they will make a linkage between their political standards and the real needs of the economic situation in Afghanistan. For example, Germany has indicated they may completely cut off the economic aid if the new government of Afghanistan doesn't meet what they promised or committed, or doesn't meet the standards the European countries set. So basically, I don't think I don't think there will be a shared definition of the so-called inclusive government between Taliban and Western countries. If the differences is huge, then the political contradictions will certainly obstacle the economic assistances from Western countries. That will make the situation worse.
You make up a very interesting point, Mr. Yang, which is that whatever government, whatever list that the Taliban will be able to produce, put on the table eventually, does that have to be endorsed by the United States or its European allies?
Well, in principle, now there's no sharp differences, especially the key phrase, say, inclusiveness. The principle is the same. The principle is great. So either Taliban and Western countries are welcome this key word for the direction of the future Afghanistan development. However, in practice, what does it mean by inclusiveness? I think it's a really controversial issue, even among Afghanistan people, which are composed by different tribes, different groups, and so on. Let alone between Western country and the Taliban people. So if, I'm afraid, if the upcoming inclusive government doesn't meet what US expected, what European country expected, then the top priority of economic recovery will be impeded by such a political difference between
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Zaidi, what is your take on this issue? Do you think there is a real possibility that if the Taliban, if what is made up in the new government does not meet the expectation or the criteria set by the West, they are not going to have an easy time getting it into place?
I absolutely agree with that, and I think what's really important and vital for viewers and for everyone to really understand about this opportunity that exists right now is that the broad definition of what would be inclusive is not that far apart. Washington, D.C., Moscow, Beijing, these three great powers are not that far apart when it comes to what they would consider acceptable in terms of inclusive. So I think it's very important for the big powers to work together and make sure that recognition of the Taliban government is contingent on an agreed set of principles. My worry is that given the way the UN Security Council resolution voting went today, the fact that China and Russia abstained because of counterterrorism reasons, and China because of humanitarian and economic reasons, didn't feel that their language was being included in the draft of the resolution, that does not bode well for the people of Afghanistan. Because if China, Russia, and the Western powers, led by the US, can't agree on a framework of what will qualify as inclusive, then the Taliban will be forced and will take advantage of the situation to identify the lowest threshold of inclusive. Now that might be okay with one or another party, but it may leave enough room for, especially for the US and the Western powers, to continue to deny Afghanistan its treasury money, the $9 billion that I earlier mentioned, and also to deny Afghanistan the kind of support that might be available from the IMF and other international institutions. At the end of the day, most international institutions will be looking to that kind of validation before they engage with Afghanistan.
Yeah. Mr. QANIT, before I go to the break, what is your take on the fact that, you know, the Taliban, what kind of government the Taliban will come up with will be very much under scrutiny by the West and by, you know, major countries, and if they don't meet certain requirements, they might not be able to get endorsement and therefore be able to have a, you know, smooth sailing with the new administration. What is your judgment on the situation?
As the guests mentioned before, that inclusiveness is a kind of term that it has different meaning for Taliban. Taliban are not accepting a kind of government which was there before. Like, they're not accepting those warlords and leaders of Northern Alliance and leaders of the political parties and make a kind of government which is mixed with all these people. Taliban are thinking that they have defeated United States in the previous government militarily. So now they are holding a kind of government that it's dominated by Taliban. It's all with Taliban, but they will form a kind of council, maybe which will be included of 12 to 15 people, and those people maybe will be included in that council. So that higher council will kind of reflect the inclusiveness of Taliban's government. But in the executive branch, I don't think that Taliban will give like some ministries or provinces to those people. I think there lies like the main misunderstanding between inclusiveness definition to Taliban and the great powers.
Okay, we'll take a very short break and we'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. We have ABDUL QANIT from Kabul, Yang Shiyu here in Beijing, and MOSHARRAF ZAIDI from Islamabad. Mr. Yang, we have mentioned this latest UN Security Council resolution a couple of times, and I think it is very important that we talk about it. So 13 members of the UN Security Council voted yes to it. China and Russia abstained. This resolution was tabled by Western country, and it's adopted on Tuesday, calling for the Taliban to facilitate safe passage for people wanting to leave Afghanistan, allow humanitarians to access the country, and uphold human rights. Well, this is the summary that's given by the United Nations. Help us understand, or help our readers understand exactly why China and Russia abstained, especially China.
Well, I think China's way of thinking on the comprehensive situation of Afghanistan is we should separate controversial and complicated political disputes from the real, urgent, immediate need, especially of the humanitarian need. That is the basic reason. If the resolution contains quite complicated factors that will impede the effective assistance contributions from the international community to Afghanistan people. That is the basic reason. So I think how to deal with the quickly emerging humanitarian problems, even humanitarian crisis, you have quite different ideas, quite different ways. But a simple and the most effective way is exclude every political factors first. Only focus on real need of humanitarian and also related economic recovery issue. Only when we settle down the first the most important immediate urgent issue of economic recovery and humanitarian prevent humanitarian crisis from coming, then we can settle down. We can sit down to discuss and try to address every complicated issue later. Yeah. If you put everything on the table at the very beginning stage, and then we will face a very troubled situation without any solution to every troubled issue.
But China didn't vote against it.
Well, because the resolution really contains positive, constructive factors. That is the basic reason. Say, we cannot say veto, but neither to support. Mm-hmm. We cannot support because such a comprehensive resolution will impede the right process for meeting the need of Afghanistan people. But we cannot oppose or veto because part of the resolution really need to be implemented.
Mr. ZAIDI, how do you look at the kind of potential diversion we're already seeing on how to address the issue of Afghanistan by the international community, especially among major countries that are the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council?
Well, I think it's really interesting. The question you asked is that why did China and Russia not veto the resolution? Why did they only abstain? And I think that that is a signal that China and Russia are sending to the Taliban. We've seen these signals over the last 10 or 15 days consistently. China has been repeatedly stressing the need for inclusion, and it's made its view clear to the Taliban leadership in Doha, in Beijing, and in Kabul. Russia has said that inclusion is absolutely at the heart of any kind of recognition that will be afforded to the Taliban. So what Russia and China are doing is saying to the Taliban, we will try to help you become normalized. We will try to help the people of Afghanistan through an economic crisis and normalize the new Afghanistan. But you have to remember that we will not stand in stark isolation or in contrast to the rest of the world, and that you have to play ball with the rest of the world. So I think that this is less a sign of diversion and more, hopefully, a sign of alignment. What's going to be really interesting is the degree to which the SCO takes the lead in terms of brokering the recognition conversation. And whatever signals we've seen, especially from President Putin so far, indicate at least Russia's preference of the SCO as the go-to multilateral forum, as opposed to the United Nations, and interestingly, as opposed to the Troika Plus, which was until recently the mechanism of choice. Troika Plus, of course, being Pakistan, China, Russia, and the United States.
Yeah. Let me go to finally, Mr. QANIT. What is your take on the importance that has been played on the regional grouping that's called the SCO, which is Shanghai Cooperation Organization? And Taliban, in the latest press conference, repeatedly stressed that they want friendly relations with everybody. They want, the international community to accept the Taliban. How do you look at the kind of urge to be recognized by the international community and be included on regional and international platforms by the Taliban?
Yeah, so Taliban are controlling Afghanistan now. It's a fact that everyone should accept. Now, there are two choices that the international community and big powers have. One choice is to push Taliban and do not recognize them. If they do this, Taliban would not be held accountable for anything happening in Afghanistan in future. There will be humanitarian disasters and other things, but no one can hold them accountable because they have pushed them out of the international community. Another thing is to engage with them and talk to them and listen to them and help them to keep those promises which Taliban are making to international community. For now, Taliban are making very positive commitments to everyone around the world. Even the United States today, the press briefing which Zabihullah Mujahid was giving in the airport when the American left, he said we want good relations with the United States and Western powers. So that's a good point, that they are not looking at those nations in those governments as their enemies and foes. Yeah. They look at them as their friends, but they say that they should come diplomatically and be in Afghanistan. They should have their embassies and help Afghanistan in its economy and its development. So I think the region and international powers should engage the Taliban, listen to them, and give them time and check them to keep their promises.
Yeah, finally, 1 minute left. Mr. Yang here, we have been talking about Afghanistan with the center of attention on Afghanistan, but for the United States, what kind of day is this? Is it a day of victory? I guess not for a lot of people, but is it a day of failure? How would you describe it in 1 minute, please?
Well, if the question go to Afghanistan people, the answer will be very simple. Yes, it's a great day, it's a victory day. But if the question go to the American people, the answer will be very complex. For American politicians, no matter you are Republican or Democrats, you cannot say failure or something like that. And they will say important day. What does it mean by importance? You can have it explained. But in short, the date of the August 1st is really important for U.S.
31st.
Yeah, not only for the current situation in the American politics, but also in the future.
All right.
We have talked about the sequelae of Vietnam War, but I'm afraid, sequelae of Vietnam.
Next time. Time's running out. Many thanks to my guest ABDUL Hai QANIT in Kabul, Yang Xiu in Beijing, and MOSHARRAF ZAIDI in Islamabad, Pakistan. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.